Okay, now, for those people online, you can officially now retire to your bed for the next session, because it's taking part in trials without leaving your own bed. So I think that you could possibly be in bed while you're listening to this. It's experience from the principal and PANORAMIC trials. I'm delighted to welcome Ly-Mee Yu, who's Deputy Director and Head of Statistics at the Trials Unit in Oxford. Demon statistician. Over to you, Ly-Mee.
Thank you very much, thank you. So the title, credit to Chris Butler, who actually insists it has to be leaving your own bed without leaving your own bed. So yeah, my name is Ly-Mee Yu, and I'll start my first slides with a group of human beings who actually run the trials. And this is the team in Oxford. There's a lot of clinical trials units in Oxford, and this is one of them. And we have about 87 people in the team in total in the CTU, and this is just part of it. But these are the true warriors of the projects that we've managed to deliver so far. So in clinical trials, in a sort of like very conventional way, the way that how we actually run trials in primary care is that we usually start off with the clinical trials units would design the trials and would actually have to contact the GP sites or the GP practices and make them as a GP sites, trial sites, or we actually get helps from the NIHR CRN networks actually to help us to identify some of the GP sites as well. And then the GPs would actually go onto the medical record notes and will do a search on a potential participant that they would actually be able to take part in the trials. And when that's done, then what they would do is they would actually contact the participants directly and give them the information, etc. And that might be through mails or individual contacting, but usually through something called dot mail that would actually send out sort of like a mass email to or the post through post that to all the participants. And then the participant can actually come back to either the GP sites or the trials unit to express their interest and want to take part in the trials. And once that's done, then you would actually have a consent process and making more for the eligibility that if it's needed to, etc., explaining the trials to them. That's the sort of like the most important thing. And then maybe sort of like the drugs was usually sort of like either given out by the GP practice or well, that's what we usually do, what we've been doing anyway, has to be delivered there. And then for the follow-up, they can either go online to fill out their questionnaires, or we would actually post it out to them, and they can actually fill out the questionnaire and then send it back to us. We all know that 2020, this is the first sort of like the lockdown that we have in the UK. But at the same time, we were actually asked to deliver a trial, and we have to be very creative in a way that that we'd have no participant coming into going into the clinic or etc. So we have to do everything remotely, but we have to do it fast. So this is the first trials that we were actually started with. It's called the principal trial, and I think that hopefully a lot of people have heard about principal trials already, so I'm not going to sort of like go into details about the study design of the study. It was actually a very fast going study, and we managed to sort of like able to get the first draft of the protocol to the first participant recruited within 3 weeks. And that's giving that our chief investigator was actually also suffering from COVID as well. This is the PICO, and again, I wouldn't be going to sort of like to go into it because I think this is trials a lot of people know about. And this is a slide that Chris Butler sort of like always presented, and it's actually quite remarkable to sort of like showing how we used to do trials traditionally versus how we did it in during the COVID time. And he did also say that this is the sort of like the first truly democratic, nationally inclusive trial of an acute condition in the UK. Now, he actually also mentioned that there's a lot of things about how the trial was run, how the trial was actually designed, and how we've got the results, everything. But he didn't really sort of like mention about like the real meat going inside of this trial. And this is what I'm going to talk about in this talk. So that the principal trials, we all started in a very conventional way. We had the GP sites, we tried it, our aim was trying to recruit 850 GP sites within a very short time period. And we would ask the GPs to go and do the search and do the sort of like the broad criteria search for the high-risk group, and send them a text and tell them that there is a principal trials. If you ever suffered with a symptom of COVID, then you can get in touch. So we know that at the time when we were designing the study, we know that there might not be a lot of people would probably have the drive to go onto the internet, even though they might have broadband, you know, because they got COVID, to go and read the whole things in clinical trials about, you know, the principal trials. So we did actually give them a number so they can actually call the center. So they call the CTU, and then we've got the trial management team who would actually take the calls and to explain everything to them. Now, what's interesting is when it was all started, that the trial wasn't actually going as well as we would hope to be, compared to another trial was actually also running in Oxford. So we had to really think creatively very quickly. So it's pretty much as a decentralization in real time, I would say. And this is what we did. So instead of just having the GP practice sites that we would actually use, we also have actually exhausted all the different kind of avenue that we can actually think about in terms of trying to recruit as many people as possible. So we started off with the online self-screening. So we actually put in the sort of like a piece in the BBC just to raise awareness of it. But at the same time, when we were doing, as we were running the trials, I have to produce of like a weekly report, and also to show that every single week where's all the hot points of the infections going on in the UK, so that we can actually go and tag on and see where we can actually do a sort of like a radio piece as well in the UK, just to make sure that we'll be able to capture as many people as possible. And then the other things that we will also be sort of like linked up with is a Zoe app, which is an app that would actually a lot of people were using in the UK, was trying to sort of like submit their symptoms to this app. So we actually just simply just sort of like linked up with them so that we can actually have a piece suggesting that if you actually have COVID, please get in touch. And we've got the ambulance service, we've got the NHS England. The Pillar 2 is actually sort of like a system that they use, we use for if you have a sort of like COVID symptoms, that you actually have to log yourself online, that you report that you've got a COVID symptom. So we actually managed to get some sort of like the information from the NHS England that we were able to contact participant as well. And then the other things that we also did was a signposting of the trial, so that there was another trial, COVID trial was running at the same time. So we link up with the participant, we link up with the investigator, and what we did was we were saying that if the participant in your trial who's actually not eligible in your trial, then they can actually consider to come and see whether they're eligible in the principal trials. And we were doing that vice versa. It's all about trying to increase the sort of like the participation rates if we can. So this is what we've done. Now, the interesting thing is when you open up this whole sort of like new areas of anyone can actually come and take part in the trial, is you have to think about, because we have a sort of like a strict consent process, we've got the participant to go online to fill in, you know, whether they, you know, what symptoms they have and all the eligibility criteria. It has to be also be verified by the GP themselves. So that means that it's not just the GP sites, but any of the GPs who actually will get in touch, will sort of like probably get a call from us, from the team, to ask them about, we've got, you've got a participant, a patient who actually signed up to the principal trials, could you actually go online and maybe just to verify whether this person is truly eligible or not. So, but we did actually sort of like come up with a lot of challenges. We had to wait for the queues, and we have people in the in GP practices refuse to provide any information because of the GDPR, and they would not actually say, they kept saying that they haven't received any of the informed consent form which sent, and there's just simply no response. So there was a lot going on, but have to think about at the same time, is COVID. So there's a lot, there's a lot of pressure is also in the GP practices, not just about dealing with the a trial, they're dealing with real patients as well. So we have to think about all that. So what we actually ended up did was we actually got the NHS England that we can have access to the summary record form and a summary care form. This is a sort of like a database that we actually tends to be used by the pharmacists most of the time. It's got a lot of prescription information, allergies, but the information there is probably sufficient for the clinical team in the units would be able to assess the participants' eligibility directly. So this is something that we probably could do within the sort of like the trials units clinical team that would also be able to access and to assess the eligibility of patients. But of course, the first question we usually ask is, would ask the patient whether they would like to have, that we would like to look at your records, and they declined. If they said no, then that's where we stopped as well. So it's all sort of like fully consented. Now, this is a very busy graph that you can see, and this is all the daily recruitment. This is not the late recruitment. This is the daily screening activity that's happening sort of like during the whole entire duration of principal trials. And the sort of like the different color is actually showing where's all the recruitment routes is coming from. And you can see that majority of them, 67% of them, was actually sort of like coming from the self-screening online. So it's actually one of sort of like the biggest catch that we had from the using this route. And there are others that actually might have a better conversion rate, but we'll have fewer people that actually come through that route. This is a sort of like the results that we had coming from the 11,700 people that we recruited to principal, and you can see that 65% was actually coming from the, again, online self-screening. So it's actually quite good. The Pillar 2 and the Zoe-Alp tends to give us a really good conversion rate, but at the same time, we know that this is a very seasonal thing, and when they go, we would not be able to use that, but this is just like during the COVID time. We would be able to use. And you can see that here, this is where sort of like, I put in all the maps that with all the dots over there is the 4,500 GP practices that have recruited at least one participant to principal trial. And it's quite remarkable. You will probably see in Scotland and Northern Ireland and Wales is slightly underrepresented at the moment, but this is where we actually found the issues, and that's how we actually did it in the PANORAMIC trial would actually have improved a lot. But as you can see that we did actually manage to have a very good geographic coverage. And looking at sort of like the time from registration to eligibility / randomization, having access to the clinical care record have actually halved the time that we were actually be able to screen the participant, the patients, and also get them randomized as well. So this is actually, it helped a lot in terms of running the trial itself. IMP delivery is another thing which is a sort of like a new breakthrough that we actually had in our trials units. So initially we have the GP sites that would actually be able to hand out the drugs, but again, because of the recruitment route that we have actually started using, we thought about different ways. We thought about whether we should use Amazon, we should use Deliveroo, that sort of like methods, but it doesn't quite sort of like worked out. And the local pharmacy was trying to link up with a pharmacy sort of like Boots, a local pharmacy company, whether we could be able to do that. But they're actually not set up for dispensing clinical trial drugs as well, so that probably didn't go. So what we did was we actually ended up using sort of like having the drug being sort of like shipped out directly from the CTU. So what we did was we actually converted the meeting room into a functional space that would be able to help us, that would be able to do the labeling, the over-labeling, the storage and the trial dispensing for the use of the principal trial. And so the over-labeling has to be done by the clinician and has to be medically qualified. And we also have, this is our pharmacist who actually checked everything before, and there is also a very strict process of who should be doing the packaging, who should be checking it, and who should be also sending it out as well. At the time of the principal trial, we did actually get the MHRA exemptions in place of the over-labeling activity. And for the delivery, We did also thought about what else we could do, but we actually using a sort of like a track courier services that from Monday to Friday, and then we were using the Royal Mail on Saturday because the courier wouldn't do sort of like this some Saturday delivery. But the most important thing here is that the IMP needs to be tracked so that you know where they're going. And then all that as well with the follow-up call of a day 2 follow-up call to call the participant and physically. And actually this day 2 call was actually something quite helpful because we've got some people from the trials were saying that we didn't realize there's a real human being behind this trial. So actually, talking to somebody really helped me to think that, this is a trial, it's not running by, I don't know, a robot or a chat GPT. So the MHRA have reluctant to extend the exemptions later on, so that we have to think about, is there any way we can actually move this forward? So what we did is we actually have managed to submit an application. And now I'm pleased to say that we do actually have a license that we would be able to dispense certain treatments or certain IMPs from the CTUs. And so we actually now have a sort of like a dispensary within the CTU. And this is pretty much one of the first, I would say, or even the first of the academic CTUs that we will actually have a license for that. In terms of the recruitment follow-up, it's pretty standard that we would do calls, but we only do calls when they not filling up the when they're not filling in the diaries. So this is sort of like to make sure, and we have actually made about a very lengthy discussions about when exactly we should be making a call and when that we should be, not just about day 7 or day 14, but when exactly that when they're not filled in the diary that we should call them, because we have to bear in mind the patients are quite sick as well. So, but on top of that, we also be using the data linkage to capture some of the data that we would need for the hospitalization and the death data from the NHS England. Now, so that's all done, what we've done for the principal trial, and it all sort of like gone through very quick, and we've done a pretty good job of it, I feel. And the PANORAMIC is another trial that happened, and it's pretty much similar, but we're actually doing these trials using sort of like the antiviral drugs rather than the repurposed drugs. So you can see how the difference between the two and the similarity between the two, how we take the lesson we learned from principle and put it into the PANORAMIC. And one of the sort of like a very sort of like specific thing was that we used to, in principle, we used a digital tool, an in-house built digital tools, and there was like 3 separate software. We thought that, there was no burden on participant, there was actually burden on the trial team. So in the PANORAMIC, we thought that, we need to up our game. And so we actually have an external bespoke, one single system would actually do everything. And, I think they have their pros and cons. I wouldn't say that one is better than the other. There's definitely a pros and cons in the 2 ways that we're using it. And we also have a pharmaceutical service company which actually do the courier of it, because at that time we don't have the MHRA exemption, and we're still in the process of getting the license. And so the electronic system, what it does is when it's randomized, it'll push all the information through to the pharmaceutical, this company who would actually be able to dispense the drug right away. So usually it takes about a day, or sometimes even on the same day that the patient can actually receive the drug. And the other things that we also did was, instead of having, you see that we have majority of the patient was actually recruited from England, and what we did was we actually, we've actually linked up with the other devolved nations. So we have 4 devolved nations, which they have their own jurisdiction and have their own rules. But having them local PI actually helped. And this is what happened is we actually managed to randomize 25,700 people sort of like within the sort of like the first 5 months of the trial, and everything was going really fast. On the one day, we actually managed to recruit 500 people, and on the same day. And this is, as you can see now, that we've got over 6,000 GP practices have recruited at least 1 participant. And you can see that sort of like there are a lot more participation from Scotland, and we also have participants from Shetland as well as Northern Ireland. So the summary of the data quality as you can see, is quite high. And we've managed to get a very high follow-up rate because we simply just use the methods that Sean Trewick from Aberdeen have always mentioned about if you're trying to improve retention, all you have to do is to give the participant a call, and that's what we did. And I think that we actually, throughout the whole PANORAMIC trials, we have made about 27,000 calls in total. So there was a big call team that we're actually been trying to do to make sure we did that. One other thing I did not mention about is the virology sample as well. We also actually shipped them out to the participant, and they do their own self-swab, and they do their sort of like the blood spot as well. And the reason why we get a really high return rate was mainly because also that a lot of the participants have found instruction how to do it very simple and very straightforward, and they were more than willing to return to the UCL, which is the virology team, who actually did all the analysis for that. So in summary, DCT, probably you can see that it does actually work, and it's actually, I think that the COVID trial have actually made it even more sort of like stand out that it works, in a way. I mean, I have to say that we still have a lot to learn about it, given that what we heard today. And the quality of trials still remain quite high, which I feel I'm pleased about, and as a statistician, I'm quite obsessed about the quality of trials. And we did manage to get a wider inclusion of participant geographically. And today we mentioned a lot about diversity, but I think, or inclusivity, but I think that one thing that we have to bear in mind, I think by using this sort of like method, it helps including people might be sort of like in a sort of like lower socioeconomic class, etc. But it doesn't really sort of like always remove the cultural, the ethnicity, the ethnic groups, the diversity of it. And I think that is still just a cultural issues that we probably need to learn more as a trialist and how to improve that. Issue with timeline, that time lag, that's probably myself. I feel that there's always a weekend, that we don't do, that you can't deliver things, like you've got the Sunday but I come from the place that they work 24/7, so you were thinking, why is it Sunday we can't deliver anything? It's like losing an opportunity, but that's just me. So the other thing is that the reducing the patient's burden, that's quite short, is the carbon footprint is one of the very hot topic at the moment. It's about the clinical trials. It's about how to reduce that, and I think DTC has a place for this to reduce it. And the routinely collected data, the digital system are quite vital, I think, in DCT. The trial engagement with participant is very important. And that is, I don't think that will can go away, to be honest. And I think that the efficient design would probably be in place. The information governance, it has to be sort of like, we've been managed to sort of like get through quite a lot of hoops, but there's still quite a lot we need to learn. Resources is an interesting one. I think that DCT is probably more cost effective if you're running actually more than one trial. So I think if you're just doing one trial, it's actually quite costly in terms of getting the human resources and building your own system, etc. And I think that's it. Thank you very much.
That was terrific. Thank you so much. I mean, we may be disappearing beneath the waves as a country in the UK, but I thought we were able to hold our head up quite high with the clinical trials done during COVID. But how much of the success of that was because it was a global pandemic and an emergency that people felt really actually frightened by? I mean, there was a great sense as well of altruism. I'm sure you all found this in your own countries. People were very altruistic. They all wanted to help. They all wanted to do something.
Yeah, I think that's definitely part of it, and especially in terms of running decentralized clinical trials. But I think that you'd be surprised, in the UK, we do actually have a lot of patients who's very willing to take part in trials. So I think that the trust is all about trusting the patient. I mean, you can see that what we've done is we actually use the online questionnaire, etc., because we trust the patient can actually do the job better. I don't feel that always that it has to be a clinician there to make sure everything's accurate. I feel that, they can do the job. I mean, especially we're dealing with, a group of older people also at the same time that they feel responsible to make sure that, because they play a part and they know that this is important.
Now, you had a big coverage of GP practices.
Yeah.
But I suspect strongly that a lot of that was because the patient went along and poked the GP and said, I want to be part of this, rather than the GP volunteering. And one has to be sympathetic because they were under astonishing pressure at that time. But does that speak to you of the power of the patient in clinical trials, in actually pulling them through?
I think so. I think that we have always been very much relying on the clinical team to get the patient for us. I think that sometimes, like the pandemic, actually helped to tell us that we can turn the table around, and having the patient themselves to also to want to willing to take part as well. And I think sometimes there has been some GP practice say that I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but they would probably screen the patients themselves just to make sure that they feel whether these patients should be included in the trial or not. So they probably they feel sort of like more sense of the responsibility to going out to reach the patients. But patient, is very different, and I think that doing it both ways, we still need the clinical team, the clinicians help with making sure that we've got the right patients that we're recruiting as well to the trial. So, yeah.
Let's hear from online. What have we got going on online?
So I think there is no specific question, but one can apply to what you mentioned, because one previous question referred to the kind of burden the DCT may have with regard to quality of the data, because you mentioned that you have high quality GCP training, protocol training, method of training for the GP and also for the patient. So I think that it's really relevant to what you presented.
Yeah, I think one other thing is because we started off as a very conservative clinical trials units, that we've got all these regulatory requirements that we have to meet. So that when you're doing a trial of this type, you have to make sure that, okay, we're actually going beyond what we think we need to do. Then we need to make sure we've got all these processes in place as well. We've got all the work instructions for everything, including the core team of what they need to say to the patients as well, the participant themselves. So we've got pretty much all that in place to make sure. And then we have the interesting thing about the consent process was that we have to explain everything to the participant about the trial, everything. And sometimes that could take up to 20 to 30 minutes. And patient was like, I'm too ill, I can't listen to anymore. But unfortunately, that's just the process that we have to have, in agreement with the sponsor, that we will have to go through all that.
So the patient was saying, just stop it, I'll sign anything.
No, we say that we'll just have to say that unfortunately we have to read through that. If you can't go through that, unfortunately we can't sort of like.
And then they gave you a kick.
Well, they're on the phone. So,
so you avoided the kick.
Yeah.
Any questions from in our audience? Well, that means that you've given an absolutely perfect presentation. Thank you so much, Ly-Mee Yu. We're going to welcome you back to the panel in a moment.